All right, tubers, Matt and Roy back once again. Uh, just got to do that real quick. Just a quick live stream. I want to see how many of you guys were out there. How many people would want to come and see this real quick. Um, we are getting ready for the trip. The whole family, we're heading out of town to go to a wedding for 4 days. This is in New York, about an hour out of the city. And then Mom and I will be heading up to my uncle's place right outside of Binghamton, and Dad will be heading back down here, basically. So for Mom and I, it's going to be a 1,500 to 2,000 mile trip total by the time everything is said and done. By the time we get to our friend's wedding in what we call downstate New York, then we go to my uncle's place in Western New York, visit my aunt in even more Western New York in the Wellsville area, and then back down to Virginia. And yes, before anybody asks, I am going to be taking my 2000 Buick Lesabre that I picked up about 6 months ago off of the Facebook Marketplace. Got a crazy good deal on that. So what did I need to do to make sure that that Buick was ready for a long trip like this? Believe it or not as much as you guys might have thought. Now, bearing in mind, this is a 2000 Buick LeSabre, so this is, in all essence, 20 years old, because as a lot of you may or may not know, cars are manufactured usually the year before their model. So this is a 2000, which means that it was manufactured sometime in 1999. So this being 2019, that car is 20 years old. And, you know, things do start to break. Now, I must say that whoever had this vehicle before me took amazing care of it. They did every bit of maintenance ever required. Oil changes were kept up. The transmission fluid was changed. This transmission was serviced on regular intervals. Before I got it, I'm trying to think, the rear shocks, the rear springs, the AC compressor, and I believe the alternator were replaced recently. Also, it recently had a tune-up, so the plugs, spark plugs, wires, all that was replaced. Now, that being said, the first thing I'm going to mention is something that happened mainly because I believe the mechanic that installed the shocks did not do what they were supposed to do. For the longest time, whenever I'd go over a bump, I would hear a clanking sound. It would be like clank, 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 and it started getting worse. I mean, it would get really bad to the point like, okay, I know that there's something wrong. For the longest time, Dad and I both thought it was the little shelf that separates the trunk from the rear seats. We tacked that back down with some screws. We did everything. Noise was still there. So then I looked at the little cover, the plastic cover that is over the spare tire in the trunk that sits between the trunk's pad and the tire. Insulated that. Sure enough, the noise was still there. So Dad was like, "What about the shocks?" I'm like, "I think they were replaced." So I looked underneath, and yeah, you could tell the shocks and the springs were recently replaced. They were nice and clean. They're actually the Chevrolet Orange. They're not even really the proper ones for the vehicle, but they do work. And Dad was like, "Okay, go ahead and grab a mallet and tap the shocks and see if they make any noise. If they make noise, then they're bad." So I tapped the left shock, sounded fine. Went over to the passenger side, the right shock, tapped it, and that was the noise. Clank, 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 clank. But what was odd is the shock itself looked good. Like when I would put my weight on that side of the rear, I would do the bumper test where you basically put your knee on the bumper and you push the car down to see how long it takes to go back up. And when it goes back up, what should happen if the shock is working properly, it should go down and back up and have very, very little wiggling. If the shock is bad, when you put pressure on the bumper, it'll go back up and it'll go down, up, down, up, down, up a few times. And mine didn't do that. So I could tell the shock itself was good. So I started taking the carpet off, the actual pad in the trunk. I took the carpet off to look at the shock tower. You guys know what the problem was? The mechanic never tightened the bolt on the shock. and actually got in there, and it was wiggling around. Now, the way the shock in the Buick works, at least, there are 2 bolts on either side that keep it secured in place, and there's one in the middle. That's the main bolt, and there's like a little tiny well, I should say it's a big washer that looks like a little bowl that bulges up, and that was the one that was loose. As a matter of fact, I could actually turn that washer freely. So I think what happened is the mechanic who installed it didn't do it tight enough, because I just had to get a wrench in there. I think it was a 16 millimeter wrench, and to get in there, really, really tighten it up. And ever since then, the noise was gone. So I think I've rambled on long enough about that. That was the one thing I had to do. Second, I do basic maintenance stuff. I've had to do an oil change. Basically, on that vehicle, it's 5 quarts of oil. Now, that vehicle, my 2000 Lesabre, has almost 140,000 miles on it. So not only do I use high mileage oil, I don't use synthetic, because it's really not necessary in that vehicle. I use 10W30 conventional oil, but I add Prolong in it each time. And Prolong is one of those super lubricants, similar to Duralube, but it stands up better to higher temperatures. And when I add that in, it helps the engine lubricate even better than if you just put the regular oil in there. So that's another thing that I had to do. We got a couple of questions here. Stephen Barber, Matt, please be safe. Are you going to do a live stream on the way up there? I wish you and your family safe travels up there. I will not be doing a live stream on the way up, because we're taking 2 cars and I will be driving. Now, in the chance that Mom might do some of the driving, I might go ahead and do a short live stream, but chances are I'm going to have to drive the whole way. And I don't know, I just don't feel safe live streaming when I'm driving. I'm better not multitasking, if you guys know what I mean. Trevor Peterson asks, how many miles does the Buick have on it right now? The Buick has about 139,500 miles. It's just shy of 140,000. And honestly, it's amazing the few amount of things I've had to do. So getting back to what I've done, the basic oil change, repaired the shock tower. Then the only other things I've had to do were replace both the window motors and regulators for the driver's side and the passenger doors. Now, I did not do that. I have to thank Dad. Dad actually did that. I probably could have done it, but whereas it took him about 20 minutes to put each one in, it probably would have taken me an hour, because I've never done it before. On the other hand, Dad was a mechanic for years. He's done 100 of those things. Yes, no live streams when I'm driving. If I'm driving, no way. Give me 1 sec. I just got to answer this real quick. Robert Jones asks, Matt, what do you do when you get a, I'm assuming he meant cruising. Well, I like to listen to tunes. I love listening to music. Caution on your hard drive. I don't know. It depends on the problem. Stephen Barber likes using the Gateway keyboard. I love those. I thought they were amazingly well built for the time. If you're talking about like the early to mid 90s ones, they were great. Then Gateway towards 2000, 2005, they switched over to, I want to say that Acer made their keyboards, and they were real garbage at that point. So what are my plans again while we're on this trip? Well, I want to get some good footage for you guys, especially where I used to live, and getting back to what I'm hoping doesn't go wrong. And I'm not, Murphy's Law happens, but I think I've prepared the Lesabre enough to where I don't think I'm going to have any problems. And a lot of people ask me, hey, Matt, why don't you take the van? It's 10 years newer. It has less miles. And that is true. But here's my thought process. the van is very expensive to repair. If something does go wrong with the van, it's going to cost me a lot of money to fix because that van has a Mercedes transmission. It has a Mercedes built engine in it. So a lot of the parts are very expensive, whereas my Buick LeSabre is not. It's extremely, extremely inexpensive to fix. 3800 engine, which has been used in so many different vehicles. The Pontiac Grand Prix used them, the Buick LeSabre, the Buick Park Avenue. I think some of the Delta 88s used them. So if something was to go wrong with that, it would be very inexpensive to fix, most likely. Alternators are very plentiful for that, starters and things like that. So again, I am not trying to predict a problem, but if a problem did occur, it would be much cheaper to fix that than the van. Now, the other reason I'm taking it is gas money. My financial situation, for the trip, it takes a bite out of the kitty. In other words, it costs a lot to go on a trip. And the LeSabre averages on the highway 24 to 26 miles per gallon, whereas my van on the highway maximum might get 20. So when I add it up, the Buick LeSabre is about 20 to 25% more fuel efficient than the van would be. So when you add those two things in, it's kind of a no-brainer. Now, the only reason I was even considering the van is for space, for bringing things back. But I don't think we're going to have a lot of time this trip to go to flea markets and garage sales. Believe me, I'll be going to garage sales. But because this trip is going to be more focused on family and friends, I think I'll have enough room with the LeSabre. And then there is another option, too. We're taking two cars up. My dad's going to be driving the Lincoln Town Car. So worst case scenario, we can actually switch. I can actually take the Town Car up to my uncle's, and he could take the LeSabre back to Virginia. And the Town Car does have a little bit more room, but we'll see what happens. I haven't made any decisions on that yet. $5 super chat from Danny K. Thank you very much. Let me go ahead and read that real quick. Hey, Matt, I missed the live chat last night. Anyways, here's $5 for the 5 sit-ups you did. Keep up the good work. I got to get back to work. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that. Any of the super chats this month are definitely going to be going to gas money, more likely than not, because 1,500 to 2,000 miles is a lot of driving. And I've done it before. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I've done it. And the reason I'm adding that much is basically 500 miles to get to the wedding or where a friend is. And then it's about another 500 miles back to Virginia. So there's 1,000 miles right there. And then all the driving that we're going to be doing up in New York is probably going to equal at least another 500 miles. So you got 1,500 miles right there. And I don't know if we're going to be taking any other side trips or not, but if we do, it's only going to add more and more and more miles to the trip. We're talking about hard drives now. Yeah, Western Digitals are excellent hard drives, especially the more modern ones. Back in the day, I really liked Seagate, but nowadays they're having a lot of problems, mainly build quality. The parts they're using are just really cheap. They're using inferior metals, so the head wears out quicker. And once that head makes contact with the platter, it's done. All right, I see the keyboard. Who was that? Stephen Barber was talking about. Yep, late 90s, like 1996, 1997. It's the Gateway Multimedia keyboard, which I actually really like those too. This was right before Gateway stopped making their own stuff. I'll tell you guys a quick story. Years ago, when I was in high school, I actually toured the Gateway manufacturing plant, Gateway Computer Manufacturing Plant here in Hampton, Virginia, which is close to where I live, and actually saw The very first Pentium 4 Gateway Essentials PCs being manufactured. These were like the 1.5 gigahertz ones. I don't remember the socket. Somebody I'm sure is going to put it down there what the socket was, but they were the very first Pentium 4s. And believe it or not, on the assembly line, they even still had some of the Pentium 3s coming out. This would have been probably February or March of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Just a good thing I remember. I really wanted to work in their call center, but unfortunately I was too young at the time. I would have been 16, 17 years old, and they were not hiring anybody under 20 because it was a very high pressure job. Honestly, I would not recommend that job for anybody. Willamette Pentium 4s. Yeah, that was the code name. Anybody remember what the actual socket was? Let me look it up real quick. $478. Socket 478 it was. And these were actually weren't even really as good as the Pentium 3s of the era. Actually, the Pentium 3s of the era for gaming could run circles around the Pentium 4s. It's just kind of the way it was. What do you got? 6 watchers and 5 likes. Thank you so much. I realize a lot of people are probably at work right now and are not going to see this until later on tonight, which is perfectly fine. This is really just the only time I had today to do a little live stream or an update. I'm going to wait a minute. I think we're going to have a few more comments in just a second. I tell you, I'm not good with multitasking, never have been. Some people can type and talk and type and talk, and I can't do that at all. Stephen Barber asked, do you still have your gateway system? Yes, actually I have 2 of them. I have 2 Gateway Essential PCs, and I believe they're both the Essential 450s, Pentium 3 450s. One is in my closet over there, and that one's running Windows 98. That one I haven't actually booted up in a long time. I need to go ahead and take that out again. And I have another identical one that's in the storage behind me, and that one works, but I have never done anything with it. It's complete, still has the original Quantum 20 gigabyte hard drive, but I just never had time to do anything with it. So might put that one up for sale, maybe go ahead and leave that for a future video. Not really sure right now. Somebody was asking me about this shirt. I'm going to show you guys real quick. Let's see, what does it say? Just one more episode. And the idea is it looks kind of like it's a Netflix shirt, basically. You can see it's got the kind of Netflix font on there. And I really liked it. I actually bought 2 of these things, and these are large shirts, believe it or not. Because I'm actually in a large, not an extra large anymore, which honestly I never thought I'd get to there. Lee Gibbs asks, what happened to the Gateway CRT you used to have? It finally conked out about a year ago. That monitor was a trooper. That was a 22-inch Gateway VX 1100, I think it was. That had a 22-inch Sony Trinitron tube in there. And I'll tell you a quick story about that monitor. That monitor was used at my college in the computer lab. Basically was hooked up to the server in there, and the teacher would use that to basically make changes to the domain. That monitor had been on consistently since it was manufactured in 2001 until I got it around 2008. And then I used it for another probably 5 or 6 years until finally the tube gave out. And just to show you how robust those old Sony Trinitron picture tubes were, that is a long time. I couldn't even guess the amount of hours that tube had on it, but amazing build quality. But sadly, it finally bit the dust, and there really was no fixing it. I mean, once the tube goes, it's really nothing you can do except replace the tube, and at that point it's just cheaper to buy another monitor. So yes, at this point, I am rocking all LCDs now. No more CRTs. I do miss it, though. That was a great monitor for gaming. All right, tubers, I am going to have to end this live stream here because I have a lot of stuff I have to do before I leave town tomorrow. I hope you guys enjoyed this quick live stream. Thank you once again to Danny K for that $5 super chat. Please continue to like and subscribe. And as always, have a blessed day, everybody.